Hey everybody, today we are going to do animal tutorial, but the very first thing I wanted to mention, this cache in your map, you can delete all of those. Sometimes it causes the textures in the map that you have painted, they don't really show up, so just delete that. The cache will reappear later when you save the map. However, deleting it will cause, sometimes if you paint on a texture, you don't see that painted texture right away. This will help you get that back. Anyway, I've got my coffee in hand. This tutorial is going to be, you might need some coffee. It's due to the nature of the tutorial, it's somewhat, there's a lot to it, and I will try my best not to be jumping around, but, well, it'll probably happen just because I'll think of other tangents that I need to explain. But for now, let's start with the basics. Let's get on to moving animals around. And if you look on most maps, if you're not using the starter map, most of the animals are under a common transform group. We have sheep, chicken, pigs, and cows. What I'm saying for sheep, if you take this, you should be able to apply it to moving any animal type around. So don't worry about if you want to move something else around. Right now, let's look at what is in the sheep transform group. If you look, you'll see, well, importantly, you have user attributes with a lot of indexes. Now, these indexes are very important. You do not want to, let's say you don't want the, I don't know. Let's go to pigs, for example, real quick. Let's say you don't want this manure take. You want a different manure heap. If you delete this or move it somewhere else and import something else. So yeah, here's a perfect example. Let's say I don't want this straw plane. I delete that and I import a new straw plane from another map. If you import something, right, it always gets put at the bottom of the transform group when you copy and paste. So if I paste a new straw plane, it's going to go down there to the bottom. I'm going to Control Z that. But if I would to, well, let's just do it. So Control X. So now let's say I imported a new straw plane. I put the straw plane there. What's going to happen now? Let's look at the pigs transform group. The dirt area, it says, is index 5. If you don't know about indexes, well, let's just cover them now. So it always starts with, it's referring to the children. And so this is the parent, this is the children. And it always starts with 0. So the 0 index is right there, pig nav mesh. If you look down here, what is the nav mesh index? Oh, it's index 0. Well, that's what I just said, 0. So let's do 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The straw plane is at index number 6. It thinks the straw plane is at index number 4. So we're going to have problems. What is at index number 4? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The dirt areas. It's going to move the dirt areas up and down. It's going to move this up and down because it thinks that that's where the straw plane should be. And it's going to move the dirt areas to this coordinate. But the dirt areas, of course, aren't really going to be dirt areas. And then the manure heap isn't going to be, it messes everything up. You have to pay attention to, I'm going to Control Z this. I wouldn't actually have to. I could just move the straw plane up by right-clicking and moving up or down. But that's the first lesson. If you change anything in here, pay attention to user attributes. You have to pay attention to indexes. We'll cover these a little bit more specifically to sheep. But the same principle applies no matter what animal you're moving, or really anything with user attributes and indexes. You need to pay attention to what you delete and what you move around. Let's get started with the sheep. The very first 0 index is a sheep nav mesh. We're going to move that at the very end. Let's go to tip triggers. Well, let's go to the pallet spawner first. The pallet spawner has a size and area, and the pallet spawner is at, let's see, the pallet spawner is right there. Oh, that's right. I already moved it because I already kind of set it up. So let's move the pallet spawner right here. And I will be honest, I don't actually know if this child is the area, which I would assume it is. Otherwise, they wouldn't have this transform group nested inside here. Or if I need to move this. So I don't know if I need to move the parent or the child. I assume it's the child. Otherwise, what's the point of having the child? But if I go back into the game and I test it out and, hey, my wool is not here, it's somewhere else on the map, then obviously I needed to move the parent and the child together, or the child should be like 0, 0, 0, and the parent, you know what, we can do that. Let's just move the child right on top of the parent, and then let's move the parent right here. And now we don't have to worry about it. They're both right there together, and look at that. So we might have to worry about the direction, and we can change the area around later. But a lot of this, I don't know everything, and part of making a map is figuring stuff out as you go. And there are so many details that even if I did remember this at some point, I forgot it. It's some stuff you just have to go into the game and test with. Oh well, do I want it rotated this way or this way? Is the size good? I don't know. You're gonna have to test that on your, by yourself. And let's look at the dirt areas. No, let's not. Dirt areas are that's the area where that grass texture appears, or corn for pigs, and you need to scoop it up and clean to make it clean. It's not actually dirt, it's just the food that they spill. But we will cover that last because obviously we need to set these first. Let's look at tip triggers. So we have a feeding trough and a water trough for sheep. The feeding trough, if you look at these triggers, and well, which way does it go? Well, if you click on this, this is the feeding trough trigger, and this is the plane. So obviously this is going to be where the tractor comes up and dumps the hay into this area. You'll also see that it has a bale trigger. So this is going to be where you're going to have to put the bales. For example, if you want this a little bit bigger, you can stretch it a little bit higher, stretch it a little bit longer that way, and then recenter it. So you have a little bit wider of an area for bales to catch. And then shovel, that's going to be, well, a shovel from a tractor. And the water trough's going to have basically the same thing. But all of these, remember, don't just willy-nilly change their placement because, remember, look at indexes. Indexes are everything. Let's look at indexes a little bit closer here. The move min and move max. So let's look at that real quick. Well, what does that refer to? It refers to the moving index. What's the moving index? 0, so it's index 1. What's index 1? The feed trough plane. What's the feed trough plane? It is that. So if you look at what that's actually doing, the move max y. Well, what is 0? So it is the y coordinate. Let's click on the feeding trough plane. If that is at 0, that is where 0 is at. So that is going to be, like it said, it is the move max y. So that is the maximum movement that this will move in the y direction. This is important to know because this is how you're setting up your straw plane on your cows, for example, or your pigs. You need to look at how high up you want it to move and how high low you want it to move. So this is how you apply and figure out what those values are. You can actually move it. For example, if I go in here, how far down, what do I want the minimum to be? When this trough is empty, what do I want it to look like? Do I want there to be any grass? Let's say I kind of want there to be just a little bit of grass, right? Because the sheep aren't going to eat it completely gone, are they? Anyway, so let's say that I want that to be the minimum. All I'm going to do is copy this value, and then I'm going to go back up here to feeding trough, and I'm going to paste it in there. And you can see that the default was completely gone. I wanted a little bit, I want a little bit of grass showing in there. So that's what I did. And let's go and actually move this around now. Let's get our farm the rest of the way set up. I think that covers the very basics. Remember, this is only a basic tutorial. Like we said, this is going to be some hay. This is going to be where the wool pallets spawn. So we're going to put their food right here. And there we go. Let's move this a little bit 90, and we might have to stretch that. Okay, so that was negative 90. Let's just square that up. We might have to stretch a little bit, maybe. Let's see if we need to stretch a little bit. I think we do. We can either make this slightly smaller. Let's just scale the shed instead. Let's scale the shed a little bit. And let's go 1.51, 2. Let's go 1.55. And that might be enough. Let's move. Whoops. We are moving our shed. Let's move it a little bit to the left. And I think that is just about perfect. Let's go back over to the water now. Let's get the water trough. Always make sure you click the parent. Otherwise, if you move those children around, well, that could be bad because then I'm dumping, that's the trigger, but it's filling up this trough way over here. That doesn't seem to fit. If you click on the parent, the children are all visible, but we will, just move the water trough for now. Let's put it right here. So right there. And let's go like that. So 90. And let's move it in a little bit. And There we go. Like that. Okay. So now we have our troughs moved. The pallet is already moved. The dirt areas, I guess we can set up now. Let's look at the dirt area. So we have a start, width, and height. Let's just look where it's at right now. And we probably should have looked. Oh, I did move it right here. So the start is on top of the parent. And then you have the width that way. And then the height that way. So the width, so the height is the long direction. So right now we need to move this roughly we're rotating the entire parent 90 degrees that way. And 90. Now let's look at the start and the width and the height. So let's move this over close to our dirt, our little sheep trough there. Let's move it about there. Now remember, sometimes if you do Control B, I might have accidentally caught that trigger. So this point might have actually been higher, like up there, wherever that feeding trough trigger was. But it doesn't actually look like I caught it. It looks like I'm on the ground. But for now, let's make sure that, yeah, we are 90 degrees. So let's look at the start and the width. So that is going a little bit too deep into... I could move that, but instead I'm just going to move the entire group. Let's look at the width now. It's still a little bit close. Let's move it a little bit wider. And the width is pretty good there. Yeah, we don't want it too close to that trough. And then the height should be good because this was originally set up for the sheep. Okay, so let's move just a little bit there so it kind of is a little bit messier than a little bit wider than the entire area. Move it slightly more. And remember, I am moving the parent because it's also moving the children as well. The children coordinates are relative to where the parent's at on the map. So here's the parent coordinates, and then the children right there. The height is only -13. It is -13 from here. If you're moving these by yourself, let's say I want this here, right? So somewhere like right there. So I just hit Control B. Well, now you have to look. Okay, so it moved these a little bit. To get everything on the level plane, just move the other two coordinates back to 0, and then you are, only 12 meters away from where your parent's at, right over there. If I can get 0 by sliding. Yeah, so somewhere like there. Anyway, we want to keep it there. Actually, we wanted to keep it where it was originally, -13. And so that's a trick that you can use to make them all nice and level and even. It's also kind of how I set up field definition sometimes. Anyway, let's finish with dirt areas. We are almost done. We just need to finish the navigation mesh. Now, one thing I'm going to do before I do that is I want this tree out here, and I'm going to actually put it in a new transform group. I'm going to go into here under level of detail. Let's say level of detail 0. Yeah, level of detail 0. I'm going to go to shape, and I'm going to go to build nav mesh mask. Now, here's where we learn about bit values. Cows are 0, sheep are 1, chickens are 2, pigs are 3. So we want sheep, but you know what? It doesn't really matter. I'm going to make this for, no, let's just do it for what we're doing. This is sheep. We're going to do bit mask 1. And if you look, it actually changes it to hexadecimal form, and that is going to be a number 2. So let's hit OK. Now, that number changed to 2, but don't worry. It is still registering bit number 1. That's what we want. We want under shape, build nav mesh mask, and we want to set that up for sheep. The reason is because I will explain that in a second, but let's grab our tree. Let's put a few trees out here somewhere. So let's do Control B to duplicate, and then I am hitting Control to put it at random directions. So what we want to do now is we want to go into Info Layer Paint mode. This is where we determine where our sheep are at. The very first step before we paint anything, this is going to be the same bit as what we just did. So anytime you deal with bits and animals, they're all the same. 0 is cows, 1 is sheep. You only want to paint 1 layer at a time. 2 is going to be your chickens, and then 3 is pigs. And in case you ever wanted any tip, if you accidentally are in this terrain layer info, see how the whole map gets darker? It does that on purpose so that you know you are in this painting mode. Hey guys, this is just a quick addendum. When you go to paint the info layer, it's probably best to zoom all the way out and then change the brush to something like 3000, or a huge value that will cover your entire map. Just don't go too big, otherwise the editor will crash. And then you want to go one by one and just click on each layer. So this will be right click, and that will remove the cows. And then this will remove the sheep layer, right click. And what I'm doing is this will remove the entire layer all over the map, because what will happen is, I'll zoom back into my sheep here. Anyway, what might have been happening is, if I think that I'm down here, I'm painting blah blah blah, I'm painting my sheep layer, I'm so happy, life is good. Well, what I might not know is there is already a sheep layer. Like, I don't know where the old navigation mesh was, but you can see where these old navigation meshes are for the other animals. So let's say the original map had the sheep over there. Well, I would have no idea about that. I could be over here painting this sheep layer, and then I would hit recreate, but of course it would create a navigation mesh here, and then it would also create one over there, and I might have sheep floating all over my map somewhere where I had no idea that they were. And so that's something important to remember when you are painting the navigation layer. Zoom all the way out, select a huge brush size, and then right click to remove remember, if you are on subtract for the right mouse button, you will remove the old layer, and then when you paint your layer, it is exactly where you are painting and nowhere else on the map. Let's go through here, and we want to paint our shutout, and this is not going to give me the desired results, which I will emphasize a little bit later, and I'll show you how to fix it. But what we want to do for now is do that. And you know what? We want a little bit closer. No, that's a little bit too much. So let's do it like that. And now to demonstrate what I was doing out here with these trees, we're going to paint over these trees. And we're not scared about it because we have that build nav mesh layer on all those trees. So the sheep are not going to be running through those trees. And you will see that when I click on sheep navigation mesh. Now, this is somewhere else. You cannot actually move the navigation mesh itself. It does not do anything. The way that you reposition the navigation mesh is you click on it. You have to click on the actual mesh. Then you go up here to create the navigation mask. That's what you want to create. Now you want to go in here. A lot of these you do not want to change. Only change the ones that I am changing. If you're flat and if you do something simple, this is all you have to change. You want to look at radius. Radius is 1.2 for cows, 0.7 for sheep, 0.7 for pigs, and 0.15 for chickens. We're doing sheep, so let's change that to 0.7 and hit enter. Sometimes just make sure that that value takes, and you do that by hitting enter. The other two things we want to worry about are the build nav mesh mask. You might recognize that name. And then the culling info layer. This is where it gathers the layer that we painted. So we painted one for sheep. That's what we want. And we want to hit recreate, not create. We want to hit recreate. And now we did not have it selected. So we got to go to view, show, navigation meshes. And there is our navigation mesh for sheep. Now you can see we might have a few problems. One of them is if you have steep terrain, you see how it generates this layer over a smooth area? Well, that's one of the things that you can change with those other attributes I was talking about. I won't go into them too much, actually at all, because this is just a basic tutorial. So if you want it easy and you want it simple, you can even go up here to replace and flatten out an area, make that your sheep pasture, and you can set up the default settings and you don't have to worry about any of this. If you can see, our sheep are going to be walking through that dirt area to get down here to this area because it is unlevel. And okay, I'll just cover it real quick. You can mess with, let's go to create, navigation mesh. You can mess with things like max climb and slope limit. So if you want them only going up gradual slopes and ignoring, you know what? Okay, let's just do that real quick. Let's go to here and let's make a big steep spot right there. So if I don't want them going up there, I think this is right. I hope it's right. I hope I'm not steering you wrong. Let's go to navigation mesh. Let's say the slope limit is, I don't know, 10 degrees. And then the max climb is going to be zero point 0.5. Let's hit recreate and see what happens. Look at that. It made us go around that ugly terrain. And it still had the, it doesn't ignore everything, right? It constrains itself to the values that we set. So if you have a little bit of terrain difference and a little bit of hills, something like that'll be fine. The sheep walking with their hooves, digging into the ground a little bit, you're not going to notice that, but you would notice them walking through a mountain. But now they're going to walk around the mountain. So those are a couple things that you can change. Something else that you might want to look at is if you look over here, well, shoot. This is going to be a problem. Let's look over here on our feeding trough. If you look under animal places, this is where the animals are going to come up to eat. Whoops, we had this backwards. I thought that feeding trough looked a little bit different. Did we mess up the water too? We did not. The water is right. Look at that. The trigger's on the outside. That's where you're going to be driving the tractor. The feeding trough is wrong. We need to flip that over to 90 degrees this way. So there we go. Now you're going to be driving the tractors on this side. I should have seen that sooner. Sorry about that. Let's look at the animal places. The animal places, look at the children. The children are where the animal's going to appear when it eats. However, it is too far away from this navigation mesh, so it's going to actually glitch at this level because the animal is going to show up here and it's not going to be able to get back to the navigation mesh. And that's when you see it do really weird things. We need to fix that. The easiest thing here is probably just moving the triggers back to the edge of the navigation. So that's probably the easiest thing to do, or we can move it forward a little bit, but I think it's easiest to move it back like that. And then we're going to have to move our sheds back a little bit to align. Let's see what that looks like. All right, that looks like it is just about perfect, right up there to the edge. And this is small enough that if we see the sheep getting up there, actually stepping in the trough, then we can move those troughs around later. But I think that's pretty good. That's something that you have to test out. You have to test out the exact distance where you don't want them walking in the metal trough, but you do want it close enough that they don't glitch with those animal places. So we will also have to remove the dirt area probably, because that did not move, but we moved the actual sheep areas. So let's look at that dirt area. Let's check out the parent, and then the start is going to be, no, that was the width. Yeah, so we need to move that just a little bit closer. Let's grab that entire group, move it a little closer, and make sure that we are not inside. Let's go a little bit more, and that should be good. Okay, right there is fine. And the other thing that you might have noticed that, well, we have this problem now because we don't want our sheep walking through the middle of the, we don't want our sheep walking through that. So one of the things that you can do is, well, we already have these tip collisions here in a building, and this is actually really good. You could just go to the building and make the whole building give it a nav mesh mask. However, sometimes that makes the animals walk on the roof. But anyway, I was actually going to go up here to create primitive and cube. And then with this cube, we could actually assign the cube what we're going to do with the tip collision. But since the tip collisions are already there, so what I was going to do is that, but you'll see what I was going to do. We can go in here to tip collisions, and we can assign this a shape and build nav mesh mask, and then click 1 for sheep. There are easier ways to do this. We could probably use the replace function. Control W is a replace function, but we're trying to make this as easy as possible. Let's just hit control. Let's just do this manually because this is a simple basic tutorial. So let's go in here, and I might have to make these a little bit smaller, but this is one way you can do it. And like I said, I was going to do this with just the cube. So, that's a little bit. So if you do not have a building with tip collision boundaries like this, you can just generate a cube or a plane and put a navigation mesh on it, and then use that to generate your navigation mesh. And then you can actually delete that at the end. So I am going to do it over here because I think I'm eventually going to have this wrapping around. So let's just put the shape and build nav mesh on there and 0 and I mean 1. And so now if we go back up to our navigation mesh, click create navigation mesh. Now that might be, we might have to resize those because that might not be enough room to walk between. Let's just see what it looks like. Okay, that's good enough. I'm happy with that. It's a little bit, they're steering a little bit too clear of those pillars, but like I said, we can make these smaller if we want. I think it's fine though. They're just going to be walking clear of those pillars. But anyway, that is how you do some basic animal maneuvering around. Remember, if you are on a steep hill, you can change things with those attributes. Remember to always go into game and check to make sure that they're not walking through anything that you don't want them to. But you should be able to get a pretty good idea based on what you have set up here. And you can play with those other values if you put them on a steep hill like this, so that they don't walk through terrain, seemingly that's too deep or unrealistic. Anyway, I think that should just about cover it for this tutorial. I can't remember anything else, so I will just end it there. Feel free to ask questions below, or it's probably better if you have specific errors or specific questions, ask them over in FSUK, so that way you can paste your log or paste pictures. And then remember, after you move something like this around, don't move all your animals at once. Like I talked about in a couple videos ago, go into the game and check for errors right now. Look for things like possibly static actor moving. If you get an error like static actor moving, well, that means that if this is the only thing you did, that means that you deleted a transform group on one of these things. For example, real quick, I guess let's cover that specific error since it's probably the most common one. So say you look at this shovel catcher, for example. The shovel catcher is a static object. If you change this with the water plane, and that means you are going to be, the game doesn't know the difference between the shovel catcher and the water plane. They basically look the same to the game engine. So it's going to be trying to move the shovel catcher up and down every time you fill up this water trough. And you'll get a static actor error because this is a rigid body static actor. It's a static object. It's not made to move up and down. The water plane, however, is made to move up and down. And so if you see an error like that, that's all that it means. You likely deleted something, or you moved something that you shouldn't, or you accidentally changed one of these index values, like you swapped the moving index with the shovel target. So that is what a static actor error means. I think that is, the other error is like something like index not found. Well, that's similar. You just deleted something and something's out of order. Go back and look. And this is why it's important to check everything you move at once, especially if you do something like with the factory script, because I think those errors are almost identical to something like the animals. So it'll just say like index not found. And if you have, if you moved everything on your map around and saved it and go into the game, well, then you have to look through every single thing that has an index and try to figure out what index is wrong. Go into the map. It takes a little bit extra time. Go into the map and check things as you go along. And you can also check things, start yourself off with some sheep. Make sure that the dirt areas accumulate where you want them. Make sure that the sheep are walking up in here and they're not getting caught. So if your feed trough was a little bit further away, then that's where you go in and make sure that your animals are actually returning to the navigation mesh. And then go out in the navigation mesh, watch your animals walk around, make sure that they're not like there, for example. That might be a little bit too much to walk through. You can see the plane does rise just a little bit, so maybe it's fine. Let's go underneath that area just a little bit, see if we can see where the plane's at. It doesn't look, oh, actually, no, it stops right there. So that's all the plane that is. So that might look a little funny. I think I'm going to need to change that. We'll just smooth that out a little bit, and then that'll be fine. Anyway, that should cover. Remember, go into the game and check. Go into the game and check. Go into the game and check for errors. I will leave you guys there. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Hey everybody, I just wanted to cover one more thing. Remember, I only covered sheep. Cows and pigs do have a few more things to them. However, if you ever get lost, for example, since I didn't cover the straw trigger, or I didn't cover the manure heap, or I didn't cover the liquid manure tank, All you have to do if you are ever confused, get into here. I taught you the basic principles, and I expect you to learn those principles and then apply them to something else. For example, the liquid manure tank. It has, yes, the sheep don't have liquid manure, but it does have a move min max y. And this is very similar. If you notice, there is a space there. Instead of having two attributes like you saw in the sheep feeding trough, this has just one space, but there is a space between those 2 points. So negative 0.9 is going to be right there, negative 0.9. Well, they set it to 0.95. That's fine. But let's look at where the maximum is, 0.8. So let's raise this to 0.8. Look at that. That is what it looks like when the manure is full. So even though I didn't teach you all these principles, they are, if you just look at how a basic map works, like the Giants default map, you will be able to figure this out. All you have to do is copy and paste. Look, same thing, manure heap. Well, what's the manure heap area? Okay, so they're saying that it starts there. There's the width, and there is the height. And if you ever want to know, look, how to, if you want it scraped out inside of there, well, then all you got to do is look at a map that has that on the map. So there we go. We know that Bullet Bill already has this set up for his map. Ignore those steel pins there. Let's go into here, and we have, now of course you won't see that green stuff. I have the snow mask on, but let's go in here to the manure heap area. Let's look at where he put the manure heap area. The start is right there, and the width is right there. And that's going to be at the end of the shed. And then the height is right there. So what do you think that's going to do? Well, that means that all your manure is going to be here. And then it's going to, it's not going to magically appear in a pit over here. It's going to be here. And then you're going to have to manually scoop this out. So if you ever get lost, I know I didn't teach you everything. But if you get lost, look at how things are set up on the default Giants map or an excellent map here like the West Coast. You know it's done right. You know that you can trust this map to figure things out. And if you look, for example, Bullet Bill he doesn't have the same straw plane that the basic map does. It has this one. This looks like the one from the basic Giants map. And then, of course, he added all these little extra ones on the side that give it a little bit more definition and kind of square things up a little bit. But all in all, if you look at, well, how does this work? So these are, well, obviously it's not going to work too well now. But here's the transform group. And remember, I moved this around. So pay attention to the level of all of these on the original level before you move them. But again, just like I taught you with the sheep, click on Cow's Husbandry and look at where's the straw plane index right there. And then straw plane min max y. So again, it's kind of like the feeding trough, only, well, the liquid manure trigger, it still has the min max y. It's the same principle that I already showed you in game with the feeding trough. They just put both of them on the same user attribute. And then you have a min, the first level, and then a max, the second level. And that is the y value. And you can figure those out based on how I saw you. And don't get confused about these. Whenever you see these, I guess I should cover this too. The indexes, so example, what is the straw plane 0? Then you have the greater than sign 0, 4. What does that mean? Well, I bet you guys could figure this out because you are all smart. So the very first 0 is because it's kind of referring to itself and it tells you to go down to another level. And then you have another 0. It is the very first transform group. So it's telling you it's telling the game engine to look inside that gameplay transform group. And then you have 4, which is the fourth index inside 0. So you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right there are the straw planes. So it is moving this up and down wherever you have these set to this value right there. Right there, that value. That is what it means when you see that crazy index level like that. So it's a little bit deeper than sheep. Don't get confused by that. It's the exact same principles that you already learned, so don't worry about that. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there at the end because if you are moving cows or pigs, you might feel a little overwhelmed at first. Like, wait a minute, he didn't teach me all this stuff, but you already know it all. Just remember, look at how a good map is done, or look how the default Giants map is done. You can just well, since you're learning, look at the default Goldcrest map. I only showed you this map because Bullet Bill did a few different things in case you wanted those on your map. But if you're confused about this, just look at the base Giants map. It is a little bit simpler. There's not as many details or layers or, different things going on. So if you're lost, look at the not Bullet Bill's map. Look at the Goldcrest map, or however you pronounce the Russian word, and then go from there. And then you can, after you set that up, then you can look at doing things like making the manure heap instead of there, setting it up inside here. Get it working based on the Goldcrest map first, and then you can do fancy things like this. Anyway, I hope that covers up some questions before you might have had them about cows or pigs or chickens if you care about chickens. And remember, go into the game and check for errors after you move around one group of animals, so you know if you have errors, what those errors are from. That makes troubleshooting so much easier. You almost don't even have to think. Anyway, thanks for chiming in with this tutorial, and hope you guys enjoyed. Have a great day.